My name is Matt Taibbi. I'm not a so-called journalist. I've won the National Magazine Award, the I.F. Stone Award for Independent Journalism, and I've written 10 books, including 4 New York Times bestsellers.
Matt Taibbi, renowned journalist and multi-time New York Times bestselling author, has previously faced criticism from mainstream media for his views on their portrayal of Russian interference in the 2016 election. This led some elected Democrats to label him as a right-wing puppet. Recently, he shared insights on the Biden laptop saga, emphasizing that there's more to the story than meets the eye. Let's hear from Taibbi.
Mark Zuckerberg had given an interview and had testified before Congress, in which he suggested that the FBI had tipped him off about that story. So I thought, if there were those kinds of communications with Twitter, this might be where we found them. And I wanted to know what those communications look like. As we discovered there, we didn't find them in that case, but we found an enormous quantity of them elsewhere, and it turned into a much more complicated story than I anticipated.
Does the Twitter files really, is it the final nail in the coffin of the idea that there is a clean distinction between the government and the media? Because that kind of informed for a long time. If you think back to like the Pentagon Papers or something, it's like, well, the New York Times is separate from the government, and it's not communicating in the way that it seemed like, in the Twitter files. It's like there are tons of people at Twitter saying, hey, FBI or whatever, take a look at this, and then various government actors are saying, hey, you really need to look at this and do something about it.
I would say that it puts the final nail in the coffin of that narrative. I actually feel guilty for being naive about that. Again, I grew up in the media. My father was, in television, and I was around newsrooms most of my childhood. The idea that the FBI might call up and say, hey, you might want to think about not doing this story, that would be crazy. I couldn't have even imagined an editor or a news director who would have even taken that call, in that way. And we found in the Twitter files all kinds of things that suggested that this relationship was not only tolerated, but that it was ongoing, regular, and collusive in a way that was kind of shocking to me.
Matt Taibbi delves into a concrete case of collusion between government entities and Twitter. This partnership raises serious concerns about the potential erosion of individual freedoms. It underscores the increasing intertwining of big tech and government, a situation that will further stifle independent thought and free speech, as the preservation of a truly open online space is crucial for fostering genuine debate and ensuring that power is not overly centralized.
A great example of this was the Aspen Institute tabletop exercise, which was technically not set up by the government. It was set up by the Aspen Institute, which is funded by the government, in collaboration with some academic institutions that had been briefed by the FEC and some government agencies. But they all got together before the release of the Hunter Biden story. They were briefed by current and former government officials who talked about the possibility that a hack and leak story involving Hunter Biden and Burisma might come out, and they kind of war gamed the possibility of what to do about that story. And then a month later, that story happens. Now, for me, if I had been in that room and that story actually happened a month later, I would feel obligated to do a story about that tabletop exercise. I would say, hey, what a weird coincidence that this thing happened. But these people had, an off-the-record arrangement with everybody they were in the room with, and they kept to it. They kept quiet, and that's a completely new level of cooperation and coordination that I would never have imagined possible.
And I mean, did it work or did it not to suppress the story? Because this is a slightly different question. Like, was it a Streisand effect where, the New York Post publishes something about Hunter Biden a couple weeks before the election, and people are like, it's the New York Post. But then I remember like going to Twitter when I heard about it, and then it was like you can't link to it from Twitter or anything. And that was really chilling. Like that was the first time I felt I was in like an Orwell novel or something, where it's like, what do you mean? Like you can't link to it or discuss it on Twitter. But, you know, I mean, do you think, did it work first? And then let's talk about like why they thought it might or might not have.
I'm not sure. I mean, I think that would be worth studying.
Yeah.
It would be interesting to do some surveys about that and find out what the actual impact of that was. I think overall, in the long run, certainly that story got more attention than it would have absent this. However, we're also learning, I think there's more about that story that's going to come out fairly soon. My understanding is that there are some depositions that are underway, that there are things that are happening in Washington where some of those committees, that are oversight committees, are still looking at that issue and the stuff that was on the laptop, because we didn't know a whole lot when that first story came out. All we knew was that they found the laptop. They didn't know a whole lot about whether any of those emails were meaningful. All we knew is that we had some racy looking pictures. It was embarrassing. But it's going to take some hardcore investigation to find out whether there's anything behind that. And that process in many cases takes years. I would just say they probably were effective in stalling that.
Yeah.
Also, there's the alternate story where they told people in mainstream media that this was Russian disinformation. And I think that was effective with Biden voters. Like that story had an effect in getting people to ignore the idea that this was anything worth paying attention to.
When evaluating our current trajectory, it's worth asking, how closely are we mirroring the path once taken by Soviet Russia? The Soviet era was marked by strict government control, suppression of dissent, and widespread surveillance.
In the mid to late Yeltsin years, the press was sort of stratified and fractured. Each of the different news companies was basically backed by a different mob or mafia interest. And they all had their own ties to Yeltsin, but basically you were looking at the point of view of this or that oligarch when you watched the news. When Putin came to power, one of the first things he did is he really consolidated the media landscape. He cracked down on companies like NTV, which is one of the last independent stations, and he got it so that there was basically no dissent in Russian media. And it's beginning to feel a little bit like that.
Although it's not, because like if you dissent from Biden, you're going to start eating polonium without knowing it, right? So
right, yes.
Can you discuss what are the steps that are happening? And it's not like against the media's interest or against media actors. They're like bringing it on, and Twitter and Facebook was filled with people who had been in an administration, then moved there to do communications or strategy, and it goes back and forth. Like, how are we getting to a place where Twitter, which, its first big glory was in helping to kind of platform the Arab Spring, and it was great because it was anti-government and it was anti-censorship, and now it's fucking like doing the towel boy for a particular vision. I don't want to say the deep state, but like of a centrist kind of mainstream ideological politics.
Yeah, I think that's right. There's obviously a huge difference between what happened in Russia. I mean, I knew people like Anna Politkovskaya who got murdered under the Putin regime. There were a couple of others I knew who had some pretty unfortunate fates. Nobody's getting shot in their doorway,
right,
in the United States. But that's actually one of the more depressing parts about our story, is that this is all voluntary, what's going on. The overarching narrative that we collectively, working on the Twitter files, decided was happening was that there was a huge infrastructure that had been built up for counterproliferation, counterterrorism within the government. It was aimed at the messaging apparatus of groups like ISIS to prevent the successful recruitment of white kids in suburban England and California. Well, when that threat dissipated, they moved over to populism in the United States, because, as you say, Twitter, which had been this incredible force for anarchy and the irrepressible political urges of the population in the Arab Spring, it kind of came out again with Trump. I mean, Trump bypassed the ordinary media in 2016, and his amazing insight was that I can just use my own Twitter account and I'll have much more reach than all of these different stations combined. And I think that freaked out a lot of people in power. And what we saw in the Twitter files essentially was a long period of rollback, which they achieved through various different means.
Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoy videos like this, please subscribe and hit the notification bell.